Welcome to Market Like It's Hot, where the podcast where strategy sizzles and marketing no-nos go to die. My name is Yasmin Robles, and with me as always is Izzy Dazowski, my business partner. We are from Rebel Marketing. And around here, we don't believe in chasing trends for the sake of it, just posting to post or burning out trying to go viral. But today we have someone that I really, really admire, also because she's probably going to keep me legal. Shay, or Maritza Nelson. She is the founder of Law Office of Maritza S. Nelson, LLC, a flat fee business law firm helping entrepreneurs and nonprofits protect what they're building. After years at top national firms, Shay set out to offer practical, accessible legal support for growing businesses, especially when it comes to contract red flags, trademarks, and employment law. She's also a proud Howard grad, a sci-fi fan, and a blues rock bass player in her spare time. So you were like, I am not going to follow the stereotypical lawyer trope, right? You were like, I'm going to be a cool lawyer. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do everything but. The number of people that come in my office and say, oh, you're not the stuffy old guy in a suit.
Yeah. Look, the first time I saw you walk in with some sneakers, like the really amazing looking sneakers and no suit on, I was like, that's the person for me.
Okay. What are the most common red flags you see in client agreements, and which ones make you just want to scream?
Anytime the footer says legal Zoom or rocket lawyer, it's probably the one that makes me want to scream the most. I tell people all the time, those are a lot like going to WebMD for medical advice, and then going to your doctor and saying, hey, I already know what the problem is, right? Just give me this drug, right? You sound a little crazy doing that. And the same thing with those kind of form documents that you can find on the internet for free 99. The problem is you don't know what you're getting, right? And you're not in a position to evaluate, is this good? Is this bad? Is this right? Is this what I need? Can I take this out? Is that going to create a problem? So that's probably the one that gives me the biggest kind of headache. But I still see a lot of people make the mistake of, they'll send over a contract for me to look at, and it'll be like such and such a company's providing services to Yasmin Robles. And I'm like, why are you a party to this contract? If things go wrong, do you want to get sued? So why is your name in here instead of your company? So I still see that a lot, surprisingly. Or just people don't think about the things that could possibly go wrong. A lot of times as small businesses, we get into contracts with somebody that we know, like, and trust. And so it's like, oh, no, we trust each other. This is going to be a great relationship. We got the bullet points. They're all here. Awesome. And we don't make a plan for, okay, but what happens if this doesn't work out? What happens if you don't get paid or you don't get paid on time? What happens if we're having a dispute over who owns the content? What happens if they don't deliver the services, right? What then? And that's really what a contract is supposed to address. It's all that what if stuff that nobody wants to talk about.
Like Debbie Downer,
Sometimes, yeah, my job can be to be a little bit of Debbie Downer. It's weird, right? Because people come in, they're like, hey, I need a contract drafted. All right, great. We're going to include all of your beautiful bullet points and all of this Debbie Downer stuff. Yeah. And I pray to God you never need it, right? But we have it just in case we do, right? That's the thing, right? It's just in case we do.
Mm-hmm. So what's one clause you wish every entrepreneur really understood better?
I think the one that probably drives people kind of up the wall, the indemnification provisions, right? Which is just a fancy way of saying, hey, if things go wrong, right? If Rebel Marketing steals a bunch of images and puts them on my website and we get hit with a copyright infringement claim, right? You're going to take care of that. You're going to take care of defending the lawsuit and the settlement and paying the attorneys and all that stuff. That's what an indemnification clause says. A lot of times people see that word, they're not really sure what it means, and they just go, I don't like it, so let's just toss it out. It's like, whoa, right? Just because you weren't sure about it didn't mean we should toss it out. It just meant that that's a good time to ask the questions like, hey, what is this? Why is this here?
We already kind of went into this, so we can skip this question too if you want to. But for small business owners downloading templates off the internet, how bad is it really? And what's the risk that comes along with that?
So here's what I tend to see with a lot of the online templates. We talked a little bit about the fact that you don't know what you're getting. So a lot of times these templates, in order to try to cover the whole country, will be based in sort of the laws of states that have a lot of regulation. So California and New York tend to come to mind. So if you're here in Ohio or some other state, you might be getting a contract that's way overkill for what you actually need to do based on where you are.
Mhm.
Or I'll see the opposite where the contract is so basic and so bare bones that it doesn't really cover some of the things that perhaps you did need to cover because of your industry, because of where you are, because of your unique situation. The other thing I'll see is maybe the template wasn't a bad place to start, but because you didn't understand some of the legal terms, you started to take things out, right? You started to oversimplify. I've seen people that, yeah, that's a good template for what it is, but that's not the template you needed for this situation, right? And so now you're
Mhm.
trying to doctor up something where you're just starting from a bad place. So here's the thing that I don't think people always realize: lawyers are like the only industry, I think, where we're supposed to plagiarize, right? Like we all start from templates, we all start from form documents, we all start from that one I drafted 2 years ago, right? And then reuse it and fix it up. The difference is that we've got the experience and the knowledge to actually fix it up for your unique situation, as opposed to here's this cookie cutter thing, I hope it works for you, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the big problem I see with a lot of the online stuff.
Yeah. So what's one legal mistake early stage founders make with these contracts that end up costing them later? And do you have a number of, like, don't mention the company, obviously, but like scare us with a number of
So
what it costs.
probably one of the easiest numbers I can scare people with, if that's what you want. People that are going into business, right, with a partner. So if it's an LLC, we usually call it an operating agreement, but it's really just a fancy partnership agreement, right? And so I'll see a lot of people that they don't want to pay the attorney to do it. So they get like the online template or they borrow something from a friend who has one. And when the lawyer drafts these, they can easily be 20 plus pages. And sometimes people feel like, that's way too much, right? I know this person, I like this person, I trust this person. I don't need a contract that's that long. And so they'll either oversimplify it or they'll take something really complicated and they're not really sure what all some of those provisions mean. And so they kind of make edits that start to contradict itself. Well, lo and behold, things don't work out with the business partner. And now we're kind of having that fight over the business, right? These business divorce cases. And your operating or partnership agreement doesn't spell out like what happens if we're not getting along? What happens if we can't agree on major decisions? What happens if you go spend money that I didn't think we should spend, right? Like those types of things. And so they get into these nasty business divorce cases. And I've seen people spend 60, 70, $80,000 in legal fees fighting over the business instead of being rational adults and saying, let's just go our separate ways. And I tell everybody, like, my background's in litigation. I do not do litigation anymore because the only people that are going to win that case are the attorneys.
Mhm.
And my experience has been both when I was at big law firms doing corporate litigation and when I started my own practice and still did some litigation, this case will settle when you all get tired of paying the attorneys. And at some point that will happen. So when I'm doing a partnership or an operating agreement, I like to just go ahead and put some language in there that's like, hey, if we can't agree on these things, let's try to work it out. And if we can't do that, let's take it to mediation. And if we still can't work it out, here's a formula. Let's just buy one of us out and we can all just go our separate ways instead of having that nasty business divorce.
Yeah. Yasmin, don't get any ideas.
No, it is like a divorce. It's like, who
Yeah.
gets the kids? Right?
No, and they're divorces that get really nasty. I mean, I've seen people spend that kind of money over a business that was failing anyway. I mean, there's
Oh,
nothing
that's
here
right.
to salvage. Like, why are we having this fight?
I
But
think it's just
people,
pettiness at that point.
well, people have this perception that they're going to have like this sort of Judge Judy like moment, right? Where
Yeah.
we're going to go into court and the judge is going to tell my soon to be ex business partner what a horrible person they are and how wrong they are, right? And I'm going to feel great. Guess what? You're never going to see the judge. Most of litigation happens behind the scenes. There's very like if there is a
Yeah.
moment where we are sitting in an open courtroom talking to the judge about this dispute between the two of you, things have gone horribly, horribly wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the saddest thing, it was me. I love like the criminal law shows where I know that they're
Yeah.
not the, but then I realized you never really do make it to in front of a judge. Like that's for a regular person, that seems kind of rare. And so I just got a little sad, but it's
Well,
fine.
especially on the civil side, like these types of disputes, it's a
Yeah.
little bit different in the criminal world. But yeah, I mean, I grew up on those shows too, right? I mean, I'll
Yeah.
probably date myself with this, but if anybody remembers the show The Practice, that's part of how I ended up, with my own law firm because I thought that that was amazing and that sounded like such a cool thing to do. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, newsflash, we don't
Well,
really try cases anymore.
yeah, I know Izzy knows this, but I wanted to be a white collar crime criminal defense lawyer when I was in high school.
Ooh,
And then I was like, I just got an art scholarship. So then I went to art school. But
well, that's wildly
yeah,
different.
Mhm.
yes, yes.
Okay. Our next question is, when is it time to move from DIY to let me try to say that again. When is it time to move from DIY to an actual attorney for contract support?
It's hard to answer that question in a way that's not going to come across as biased just because I've seen all the stuff that can go wrong.
You can say every
Um,
time.
yeah, I mean, I would certainly prefer that you do it every time, but especially if you look at that contract and you have questions, right?
Mhm.
Most small business owners are incredibly smart people, super driven, super motivated, right? You've built something oftentimes from scratch, right? I don't say that to insult your intelligence. It's just some of the words in that contract mean don't what they mean is not necessarily what they would look like to a lay person, right?
Yeah.
And so that's where I always tell people, like, let's just be a little bit careful. And if you have questions, I'd much rather somebody ask the question than to sign it and be like, oh, I didn't know what that meant. Guess what? The court system doesn't care. Right. That's what you signed. That's what you're stuck with. But if you are going to do sort of the DIY route, I always tell people, the contract needs to be crystal clear. Does it explain who is supposed to do what, by when, and for how much, right? Um, are those bases covered? Can you hand the contract to a friend who's got some business sense and without telling them any of the background, right? Because the court's not going to look at all the extraneous text messages and emails outside of this. They're just going to look at the document. Can that friend just look at the document and understand and answer those basic questions? And if they can't, there's a really good chance something's missing.
So don't run it through ChatGPT then. Is that what you're
Can I just say, ChatGPT and all the other AI things out there are going to keep lawyers gainfully employed for a very long time.
Yeah.
The problem with AI is oftentimes, unless you ask, it's not telling you what its sources are, right? And so it could be relying on bad information, right? Because not everything on the internet is true just because it's on the internet, right?
Mhm.
A lot of times, I mean, I've even experimented with it because I know, clients and prospective clients are doing it, right? So I've experimented with it. And the stuff that it spits out, oftentimes is just that very basic, right? Very kind of bare bones outline of a contract. But it's not good at really getting into the details and the weeds and the devil's in the details. But the other problem is I see more often people are going to chat GPT or whatever for advice. And because these algorithms or large language models are trained to be sort of very sympathetic, very friendly, right? Very agreeable. They're oftentimes agreeing with you instead of challenging you. Like, hey, you're giving me this fact. I've got follow-up questions, right? ChatGPT is not going to do that. It's not going to say, hey, I know you want to fire that horrible employee, but have you considered X, Y, and Z, right? It's not going to do that. Um, I've seen instances of people, they'll ask the question and you can tell by the way they're asking it and slightly rephrasing the facts, they're trying to get to an answer they want, as opposed to a lawyer saying, hey, here's the pros and cons, here's the risk. Have we considered this? What about these other possibilities? Right. So it misses things, but it doesn't tell you, hey, here's what I'm missing. And I used to say the same thing before with search, right? Yeah, you might find a good blog post on an attorney's website. It's like, okay, that looks like a legitimate source, but it's giving you, a 5-minute overview. Does that still fit your situation, right? Like, is there an exception to the rule that that blog post didn't have the time and detail to cover? Same thing with ChatGPT.
Yeah. I agree. All right, so let's dive into branding and trademarks. What's the biggest misunderstanding small businesses or entrepreneurs have when it comes to protecting their brand?
So everybody seems to think that if I've got an idea and nobody else has the exact same idea, I can trademark it. And so I tell people all the time, the standard with trademarks is that one cannot be confusingly similar to another when used on related goods or services, which I know is a mouthful. So the example I usually give people is if you remember the movie Coming to America, McDowell's is confusingly similar to McDonald's for obvious reasons. It does not matter that they aren't exactly the same. So when you come in and you're like, hey, I've got this cool name for my business or my product or service, nobody else has the exact same thing. There's a couple things that are a little bit close, but I think it's okay. You're wrong, right? Like I don't know how else to explain this. Like you're just wrong. If somebody else has something that's similar, confusingly similar, then we've got some concerns about it. And so ideally you let an attorney do a trademark search so we can figure that out. What is confusingly similar? That's a whole area of trademark law that is as clear as mud, and is going to take some digging into the legal arguments and, how can we convince the trademark office to let this through if it's close to this, or, is that not close enough, right? So we have to kind of dig into all of that stuff. So again, yeah, your idea is yours, but is it as unique as you think it is, unfortunately?
And sorry to just for clarification, is there a difference between the logo versus the name of the business, right?
Yeah, there is. So that's a good point. So trademarks, I always tell people, right? Trademarks, think about branding, right? So a trademark could be the name, it could be the logo, it could be the slogan. So for example, Nike's a trademark, the swoosh symbol is another trademark, the slogan "Just Do It" is another trademark. If you have all three of those and you want to protect all three of them, that's 3 trademark applications. So now you're paying that fee 3 times. So when I'm talking to a small business, let's think let's take some time to think about, is that in the budget? And if it's not, what's most important? Trademarks have to be renewed periodically. Is that logo that you've come up with today as a brand new entrepreneur the same logo you're going to have in 10 years? If not, perhaps we don't want to trademark that just yet. And my experience with small businesses is the name tends to stick around, right? You're pretty good on that. The logo, we tend to be playing around with, trying to figure out what resonates, making some tweaks to. And as soon as we start making tweaks, now we got to start the process all over again, which is fine if you're a huge company like a Coca-Cola, right? You could do that every time you change the font or whatever else. But for the rest of us, right, is that in the budget?
So, kind of going off of what you were just saying, if a business owner is using your brand name, but then they haven't filed the trademark, what are the potential risks that come along with that?
So if you haven't filed your trademark, you do have what the law calls common law rights, meaning that if you were the first to use it, right, you do have some limited rights, but the law hasn't really caught up to the internet age. So it says that you have the right to continue using it in your geographic area, which makes no sense in this day and age of the internet, right?
Yeah.
And so it becomes a question of, if you've got it here first in Ohio, but somebody's got something very similar afterwards in Michigan, can you prove that you're doing business, over there in Michigan, and that you should be entitled to stop them from using that trademark, over in Michigan? Or are you just kind of limited to, hey, you're a local business here in Columbus, Ohio, and that's kind of what your geographic market is limited to? So that can get a little bit tricky to try to figure out. The flip side of that I see, because if you think about it, trademarks, right, they give you the right nationally to use that particular trademark, right, on your goods and services. The flip side I'll see is you've got a small business that is local. Perhaps they don't need a national trademark registration, but because they don't need it, they assume that I don't need to be concerned with what else is out there. And that's not true, right? The law assumes that everybody's aware of what's in the trademark database, as strange as that may sound. So I've seen situations where somebody's, gone all in on their marketing and branding, and lo and behold, they're not aware that one of their competitors has something very similar, and their competitor has already registered with the trademark office. And so in a situation like that, it's like, can you really challenge their trademark registration, or are you in a situation where you lose, right?
Mhm.
And oftentimes, particularly with small businesses, you'll see this where people are kind of marketing and advertising in the same channels. So without getting into too many of the details, I've seen a situation before with the Arnold, back before COVID, where everybody's there with their fitness products and supplements, and lo and behold, your booth is next to your competitors, and your logos look awfully similar. One of you's got the trademark registration, one of you doesn't. Guess who loses, right? So that's kind of what you run into sometimes with, like, oh, I don't need to bother with this trademark stuff. It's not that important to me.
Yeah, can you walk us through that, what that process looks like to get something trademarked?
Yeah, so ideally it starts with the trademark search, right? We want to try to figure out what else is out there that the trademark office might say is confusingly similar. There's a whole body of case law that kind of deals with, those arguments back and forth. Everybody wants the law to sort of be black and white. It's not. So when an attorney says, the answer is it depends, that's probably the most honest answer we can give you 90% of the time. But we'll do that trademark search. We'll kind of walk you through the results and say, okay, here's what we found, right? Here's what I am concerned about. Here's what I'm not worried about. Here's what's kind of muddy and in the middle, and kind of the arguments we could make or not make. And, kind of here are the risks of moving forward, right?
Mhm.
And if we decide to move forward, then we'll file the application with the trademark office. The applications, they're not too terribly long, but there are a few things that will trip people up. For example, you have to, if you're doing a logo, you have to give a very detailed description of the logo and the colors and everything like that. You have to designate what goods and services you're using that trademark in connection with. And if you want to save on fees, you need to make that pigeonhole into the trademark database's kind of list of goods and services. Um, and then if you are already using your trademark, you need to provide what they call specimens, which is basically a sample showing, here's how I'm using the trademark to actually market and sell my products and services. And that can also get a little bit into the weeds at sometimes. So with all of that, we'll submit the application and pay the fees. And then we wait. The trademark office got very backed up during the pandemic. They're starting to dig out. It's getting a little bit better. But if we filed a trademark application as we're recording today at the end of January, I would not expect to hear back from the trademark office for probably about 6 or 7 months. So 6 or 7 months go by, then we'll usually hear from what they call the examining attorney, right? That's the attorney that's kind of like the judge or the prosecutor on the other side of the case. And they'll come back sometimes with what they call an office action that says, hey, here's what we have, our concerns about your application, basically, right? You've got, I think they've cut it down now, 30 days to respond. Don't quote me on that, but they'll give you a period of time to respond. So that could be minor stuff. Hey, you forgot to give us the colors in your logo, right? Or you forgot to give us, the date that you pulled that web page as your specimen showing that you're using the trademark. Or it could be something bigger, and it's usually going to be, we think that we're going to have to reject your application because it's confusingly similar to these other trademarks that have already been registered. Worst case scenario, some of those are pending. And so they'll say, hey, we're going to suspend your application until we resolve the ones ahead of you because they processed them in the order that they were submitted. So you could kind of get stuck in limbo for a little while. So if necessary, we'll go back and respond to, whatever their concerns might have been. If all goes well, then the trademark will kind of move forward in the application process. At that point, if we included specimens, it'll go to publication, which is just a fancy, they publish it in something called the Official Gazette. I don't think anybody actually looks at. But they have to sort of put it on notice to the public, like, hey, we're thinking about issuing this registration. Typically, I'll tell people, if there are some concerns, if your competitors, were like, oh, we don't like that application, we think it's too close to ours, we would have heard by now, typically. If you didn't include specimens, then that's what we call an intent to use application. And so they'll say, okay, great, this looks good. You'll get what's called a notice of allowance. And they'll say, okay, now you've got to prove to us that you're actually using it before we can give you the registration. And you'll get 6 months to either, prove that you're using it or file a request for extension of time. And that can drag on for up to 3 years. So if you've got applications ahead of you in the process, that you can see where this can start to drag out a little bit. But if all goes well, we'll, it'll go through publication. There won't be any objections. Several weeks after that, we'll get the trademark registration certificate. And then at that point, we'll say, okay, you'll be hearing from us in a few years when it's time to do some of this renewal paperwork. In the meantime, everything with the trademark office is public. You will get a lot of spam, a lot of things that look very official and tell you to pay money to some random office in Alexandria, Virginia. Don't. If you hear anything, talk to your attorney first.
So going into employment law and growing your team, what legal shifts should entrepreneurs be thinking about as they hire their first or maybe their 10th employee?
Oh man, hiring people, that's a tough one, right? Like as entrepreneurs, oftentimes we are experts in our particular industry. That does not make us experts at HR and how to manage people, even how to hire and find good people. So that is a whole other can of worms, but it's also like a really cool milestone, right? Because you feel like you're growing your business, things are taking off, you feel successful in that moment. From a legal standpoint, the first thing is, are we hiring these people as employees, or are we bringing in independent contractors? And so one of the big issues I see is there's this tendency of, I don't want to deal with payroll taxes and benefits, so I'm just going to make everybody a 1099. And legally, whether or not somebody's an employee or a 1099 is not this sort of choose your own adventure kind of a thing, right? It's a legal determination. So just because you decide that person's a 1099 does not mean that the courts and all the tax agencies are going to agree with you. So that's kind of the first thing. Making that distinction really does depend on how independent that person is, right? If you are telling them what to do, when to do it, where to do it, how to do it, like it or not, they're an employee. And this fear that says, hey, I don't want to deal with employment law, I just want to make everybody a 1099, a lot of it is overblown. Yes, you'll have to deal with payroll taxes, right? You'll need a payroll service provider for that. But as a small business with only a handful of employees, like, you're not legally required to offer health insurance. You're not, at least here in Ohio, you're not legally required to offer a bunch of paid time off. You're not legally, you don't have to give somebody 2 weeks paid vacation. So a lot of those things that people are afraid of, like, oh, I've heard it's going to cost me so much more and I've only budgeted this to hire somebody. As a small business, you may not need as much of that as you think you do. At least from a legal standpoint. You may need it from more of a, how do I compete on the job market, right, type of a standpoint, because you're competing for potential employees the same way you're competing for customers. So, but you've also got the flexibility to say, hey, what can we do to make working for a small business so different from working for corporate America, right? What type of work-life balance can we offer? What are those sort of intangible benefits that we could offer? That, yeah, we can't give you a great, health insurance package, but we can give you this instead.
You answered my next question. So I'm going to ask about contracts between your employees, and whether it's W-2 or 1099. Should you, I know some people get those contracts. Some people just say, have a handshake and say, okay, well, you're going to do, for example, social media from now on.
Yeah.
Or even interns, right? So how would we as business owners deal with that?
So I think most situations, an offer letter probably suffices. When you think about an employment agreement, a contract, right? Think of it as it's a binding contract, right? It's not only binding the employee, but it's also binding your company. So if we're putting a bunch of things in there, it's a little bit hard to say, hey, I'm just going to unilaterally change the contract because I don't want to do X, Y, and Z anymore. So for your typical, I'm paying this person hourly, a lot of even salaried employees, think about jobs you've had before, an employment contract is probably overkill. And there are a lot of things that are typically in employment contracts that we don't want, right? A lot of times employment contracts get into the weeds of you can only be fired for cause, and here's what cause is. Well, as a small business, you really want to preserve that employment at will. You don't want to be limited to I can only fire somebody for cause. Um, I'll see people put things in employment agreements thinking that they've got to have an employment contract, like, oh, and you're going to get so many days of paid time off, and your hours are going to be this and this. And it's just like, why do we want to bind ourselves as the company to that instead of, an offer letter that's a lot more, hey, this is the offer. Here's what your position is going to be. Obviously, we can change that anytime we want to, right? And just keeping it a lot simpler. Where you might want to have things that are more binding and would be in a contract might be provisions around confidentiality, maybe non-solicitation. If you've got somebody that's creating things for you, you might want to make it a little bit clearer about who owns those creations, right? So things like that, we might put in an actual agreement next to an offer letter. But usually I tell people, if you're going to do an employment contract, we want a good reason. You're offering them equity in the company. There's a key person that you want committed for a set period of time. They can only be fired for cause. They're going to have some weird pay structure, right? Where maybe there's a commission component. They're entitled to bonuses if they meet certain metrics in the contract, right? Like those are the types of situations where I say, yeah, let's do a whole employment contract.
What does at-will employment really mean and not mean?
So at-will employment, which is true in all but I think 2 or 3 states, essentially is you can fire somebody at any time for any reason, just not an illegal reason, right? You are employed at will. It also means the employee can quit at any time for any reason or no reason, right? So it could be, I'm from the South. I hate the fact that there's a foot of snow outside. I'm in a bad mood. Everybody's fired. It's a horrible thing to do. It's not illegal. You're an employee at will. Good riddance, right? You obviously can't fire somebody for an illegal reason, right? You can't fire somebody for, sex or race or religion or disability, right? But yeah, it could just be like, hey, this is not a good fit. You're not working out. You got to go. That's fine. Now, there may be things hidden in the background that make people question whether that's true or not, and that's a different issue. But employment at will is just that. Like, we are both here because we want to be here, and when we don't want to be here, we will no longer be here.
Okay.
Right.
Well, some extra questions that we can give you. I have one. What's one misconception about working with an attorney that you love debunking?
Everybody thinks that it's scary, that we're mean, and that it's going to cost a ton of money. And I get it, right? Like I used to ask people when I first started my own practice, have you ever had a bad experience with an attorney? I'd love to hear about it just so I can make sure that we're not doing those things, right?
Yeah.
And it was almost always I'd hear a long drawn out story about somebody's terrible divorce. And so I stopped asking the question.
Yeah.
Working with an attorney does not have to be scary. Just like any of your other business partner service providers, right? You want to find somebody that like and trust, right? And I don't care if that's me or somebody else, but you want to have that relationship where you feel like you can ask them questions when you need to. I like to work on a flat fee basis whenever I can, precisely because of that. I don't want you to be afraid to pick up the phone and say, hey, I've got a quick question, because you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to show up on the bill in 6-minute increments. How long is this phone call taking? Is this phone call worth it, right? For 0.3 hours or whatever it might end up being. So that's why I try to stick with flat fees whenever possible, so that we can avoid that. There is no such thing as a stupid question. Where people get bitten are the questions that they don't ask, right? It's the, oh, I thought I knew. I did a quick Google. I thought it was fine. ChatGPT didn't tell me there was going to be any issues. And now all of a sudden things have gone horribly wrong.
Definitely.
So you touched a little bit upon on that, on this, but what's your goal, or how do you help clients build that legal infrastructure that will help them scale the business? In my mind, I'm like, do I need a startup or as a small business, do I need all of these contracts just templated out, ready? Or can I stair step it, the trademark, all of these things are running through my head and then I get overwhelmed. How
Yeah,
can
yeah.
you support? Yeah.
Well, and it can definitely be overwhelming. I wish I could take credit for it, but one of the things clients were asking for very early on was sort of like a subscription model. So what you'll see some firms refer to as a general counsel service. And that way we can kind of figure out like, okay, here are all these things we've talked about today, right? I mean, just this podcast. Oh my gosh, I've got a million things I need to go do. This is going to cost an arm and a leg. And we could say, hey, you don't have to do it all at once. And it does not need to cost an arm and a leg, right? We just need to get it into your business budget, right? It needs to be a line item, just like you've probably got a line item in there for marketing, for paying yourself, for, paying the accountant, right? Like you've got line items built in. There are things that you're planning for. Same thing with legal, right? Let's just get it in the budget at a flat monthly fee. And so now we can put a plan together that's okay. What's going on in your business? What are you most worried about? What are your goals for this next year? Okay, let's start tackling those things first, right? Maybe it's the marketing. Maybe it's you've got a brand new brand idea and we need to figure out, is this really going to be viable, right? Maybe it's the contracts because you keep getting burned because customers aren't paying on time, right? What's going on, right? What is the thing that's most important? Let's tackle that rock first. And then we can say, okay, great. Next month, let's tackle another one, right? And so making it a little bit more palatable, right? A little bit easier to chew and helping people, kind of take one bite at a time and realizing that for me in my practice, right, this is a lot like, your family physician. This is about, preventing things from blowing up and becoming major problems. This is about catching stuff early, right? And that's really my goal, is to help people kind of get that peace of mind of like, all right, yeah, there's a lot that we could potentially need to tackle, but it doesn't have to be a giant scary elephant in the room.
You're a blues rock bass player and a sci-fi reader. How does that show up to your approach in business?
So I firmly believe in work hard, play harder. And as you know, as entrepreneurs, we could very easily work 24/7, 365. And you need to be able to turn it off at some point and just relax. And so, yeah.
What is that word? What?
A work-life balance myth that you keep hearing about on the internet that your employees are demanding that you give them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fix it. I need time off. Yeah, as entrepreneurs, we're terrible at that, right? I'll be honest, I am my own worst boss, okay? Like, worst boss I have ever had by far. But you gotta have something that helps your mind just kind of shut down and not worry about this client problem and that client problem, or, oh my God, is this marketing campaign getting any traction? Am I getting enough likes and views and interactions or whatever? And oh my God, is the next blog post ready to go, or whatever the case might be, right? So for me, playing guitar and bass, taking some time to, just chill out with a good book that has nothing to do with reality, which is why I like science fiction and fantasy. It's the thing that if I'm doing that, I can't worry about the business. I can't worry about clients. I can't worry about the marketing campaign. Um, and it's nice to have something to talk to with people besides legal stuff. I mean, I can nerd out on this stuff all day long. I enjoy it. I'm going to sit in my office and talk to people about this stuff all day. I imagine that if you've made it through the entire episode, at some point your eyes glazed over and you just went, oh my God, this is too much, right? I get it. And so we got to have something else. And I think it's a good way of reminding people of like, yes, I'm an attorney and a legal nerd. And, I'm a normal, fun person. I like to do things and have fun and go on vacation too. And I'm trying to build a business just like all of my clients, right? It's okay. We're going to get through this.
Yeah, yeah. So we typically, before we do our outro, we typically ask people, how do you market like it's hot? But for you, I guess, how do you lawyer like it's hot?
Oh man. That's a good question. Um, I, I'll try to answer both of those because I'm hoping on the marketing side, this year I've been really going all in on the content marketing. I feel like, as lawyers, part of our job is to educate people. And so my way of trying to make some of this stuff less scary, is doing stuff like this, right? Coming on your podcast. But also, trying to be a lot more intentional with my own practices, YouTube channel and Instagram and the MailChimp and the blog posts and all of that stuff. And so trying to get these legal chunks out there so that if you're like, I'm not going to schedule a consultation with an attorney, there is at least a reliable source you can go look at to at least get the basic foundation. On the legal side, I really pride myself in trying to make these concepts accessible, to try to explain them to real people without talking down at people. So many people come into my office and it's like, oh my gosh, I met with this other attorney and this old guy and gray hair and stuffy and, just looked at me like I was just some little lady starting up a little bakery business and, oh, just whatever, you're not serious, and I don't want to be that. Right. I sometimes as attorneys, we can have this reputation that's somewhere down there with like dentists and used car salesmen. And so I want to make this easier, right? I want to be a partner in my clients' businesses, right? I want to be their attorney long term and not just for, hey, I need an independent contractor agreement today. What's the cheapest you can do that for me, right? I want to help you build a business so that this isn't just your first independent contractor, but a decade from now, you've got a staff of whatever that fits your goals. And we've got the right employee handbook and plans in place. And you've got Yasmin and Izzy, helping you out on the marketing side. And we go, hey, that's a really good brand idea. I think we want to protect that, right? And really be that team player.
So if we are overwhelmed and silently crying in a corner as a small business owner about our trademark or whatever, not speaking for myself, obviously, what can we do? How do we get a hold of you?
Yeah, so website's msnlawoffice.com. I've got online scheduling built right into the website on every page. So you can always schedule a consultation, take the time to ask some of those questions. I still do good old-fashioned complimentary consultation, so you can book 25 minutes and pick my brain for a little bit. Or if you're like, I've got a lot of questions, I'm going to need more time, there is an option for a paid consultation as well. If you're like, absolutely not, I do not want to sit down with an attorney, these questions are embarrassing, they're just going to think I'm silly, that's not true. But you can also find me on YouTube, Instagram, MSN Law Office on both of those, as well as LinkedIn. So trying not to overwhelm myself with every social media platform out there. So I stick to the ones I personally use.
Thanks for listening to Market Like It's Hot. If today's episode made you nod, laugh, or scream, finally share it with your team or your boss who still thinks we should be on Facebook more. For tools, templates, and hot takes we don't share on the air, head to myrebelmarketing.com and grab our free marketing worksheet at myrebelmarketing.com/checklist. And if you're feeling bold, DM us on LinkedIn and tell us what you're sick of in marketing. We might just feature it. Until next time, stay strategic, stay spicy, and whatever you do, don't settle for boring. And thank you for being on our podcast.
Thanks for having me.